practicing martial arts?
My name is Karl de la Guerra. I'm from the United States, and I'm Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Karl de la Guerra, Inc., headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have been in the protective services industry now for 38 years, with a combination of military police, civilian law enforcement, government contracting, and international security management. Through my entire career, I have been a practitioner of a variety of different styles of both martial arts and defensive tactics. Now, please understand, I do not claim to be a martial artist because I am not a martial artist. However, because of my profession, what I am is a survivor. What I have had the opportunity to do in my career is to refine, perfect a variety of martial arts and defensive tactics techniques into what works specifically for me.
Imagine the situation. The person found himself on the street and the gun is aimed at him. How he can act in this situation?
This is one of the most difficult situations that you will ever find yourself in. When someone has a gun pointed at you, there are only a couple of things that are in your favor. You must take into consideration your environment. The two factors of time and distance are both very, very important at this moment. So therefore, because of time and distance, you have two options. If you are very close to the individual who has the gun, you can attempt a disarming technique. If the individual with the gun is beyond your arm's reach, then you must immediately move and seek a position of either cover or concealment. I mentioned utilizing a disarming technique, and I will say this: you never want to try a disarming technique for the very first time when the moment is that someone has a gun on you. All defensive tactic techniques must be practiced extensively before you ever have to use them. And the other thing that must be remembered is that everything we practice in defensive tactics is what is called a perishable skill, a skill that we will lose if we do not practice it.
Imagine a situation, even if you have a knife in your pocket and you can be shot with a gun. How are you going to act?
Once again, this situation has to do with time and distance. The knife that you have to defend yourself will only be effective out to your arm's reach. So if you're in close proximity of an individual who has a gun, you can attempt to utilize your knife. However, if I am that close to an individual who has a gun, my first priority is not going to be to utilize the knife to defend myself. My first priority is going to be to remove the gun from their grasp. As we have seen from many actual situations, an individual can be stabbed repeatedly with a knife and still continue to shoot a gun. So the objective here is to remove the gun from the situation. Furthermore, a knife is like any other tool used in defensive tactics. You must practice extensively with that knife to understand the effects that will have when you utilize it against a human body.
Let's imagine in another situation, even if you have a gun, you can be killed with a knife. How you are going to act in this situation?
Certainly, we are always trying to refine and better techniques to counter knife attacks. As studies have shown, just because you have a gun doesn't mean that that knife attack will not be effective against you. If you have a gun and your opponent has a knife, the best thing you can hope for is to remove yourself from the angle of attack of that knife. And that is to be able to lower yourself to the ground, to get out of the angle of attack of the knife, and then from a non-traditional shooting position, while on the ground, you can return fire. It is not like we see on the movies where one person pulls a gun, another one pulls a knife, and they just continue to shoot each other and stab each other. In that situation, you are only depending on who gets the luckiest strike.
Even you have both a knife and a gun, you may be still killed with a knife or a gun, or something else. For example, someone could throw a stone on your head. How you are going to do in this situation?
When there are multiple weapons involved, you must be extremely aware of your surroundings. You must continuously maintain what we call situational awareness. It must be understood that at moments like this, the role of the policeman and the role of the civilian are completely different. The role of the policeman is to deliberately take an individual into custody. So there is not necessarily the option of retreat. As a civilian who is attempting to defend yourself, retreat should be your best option in many cases. Of course, training is an extremely important thing in this type of situation. We like to think that if we were ever in a position where we were attacked, we would perform at a very high level. However, it has been proven that when a person is attacked, they will only perform at their lowest level of training that they are capable of performing. So we tell people that your worst day in the dojo or your worst day on the shooting range is how you can expect to perform in the event that you are attacked. So you see, that is why as defensive tactics instructors, we are always telling people to increase your level of expertise.
When you have a nothing, or your opponent has both a knife and a gun, or you have more than one enemy, what you can do in this situation? How to get the absolute advantage in such situation?
The first thing you must do is add movement to the equation. We refer to this as moving off of the X. Imagine the middle of the mark of an X is where you are at the moment you realize you are being attacked. It is at that very point that your attacker has focused on you, assessed you, and will conduct his attack. So if you immediately move off of the X, you are forcing your opponent to reevaluate and recompute the attack situation. That is the first thing. The second thing is remember that you never have nothing. You always have access to something you can use as a weapon. And this is called utilizing improvised weapons. It doesn't matter if it is a pen that is in your pocket, if it is a rock on the ground, or if it is a broom that is sitting next to a wall. Anything can be used as a weapon. When your life is on the line, never give up. Never be defeated. Continue to fight with everything you have. Always remember that you have options and that time and distance can turn into your favor.
If opponent puts the gun against your back, what you can do in this situation?
So if I understand correctly, the situation is an individual has come up and put a gun directly into your back. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. The first mistake that attacker has done is he has placed that barrel of gun against my back. So now I know exactly where that gun is located. This will work greatly in my favor if I am able to know the exact location of where the gun is. The next thing that must be done is you must begin to occupy as many of the senses, the physical senses of the individual as you possibly can. This can be done through beginning to speak to the individual, which occupies his sense of hearing. It can also be done by moving your hands, because that will occupy his sense of sight. And you begin to overwhelm the other senses so you can have more of a room to move and to perform your tactic. If the individual wanted you dead, he would have killed you immediately. Therefore, there must be a reason that you are still alive, and that reason will give you the option to be able to counter the attack. And then there are a variety of options, techniques, if you will, that can be utilized to disarm the individual from a rear attack.
Last question. What you can tell to the watchers in the end of program?
I would like to say thank you for listening to this. This is just a small portion of some recommendations in situations like this. Mm-hmm. I would encourage everyone watching that is interested in being able to defend themselves to pursue formal training in defensive tactics or some form of martial art. I will leave you with this thought from my experiences. Even though you might know many different martial arts techniques, in performing to defend yourself, you will usually only utilize 3 or 4 of those techniques on a regular basis. I say this because of my experience taking hundreds of people into custody working in law enforcement. So the advice I leave you with is to perfect a few, just 3 or 4 different moves that are going to work for you as an individual to help you defend yourself. Begin there. Thank you for your time. I'm Karl de la Guerra. Good day.